Perfect.
Briony McKenzie, I'm so excited to talk to you today on a personal level because you are one of my coaches and I have received such benefit and growth from being in your world and having the support of you and Delaney for the last 2 months or so now, 3 months. I don't even know. I've lost track of time. But it's such a pleasure to interview you today. And you are, I of course, went to the website and gleaned how you talk about yourself. And you introduce yourself as an ex-corporate lawyer turned entrepreneur and personal development coach. So welcome. I'm so excited to chat with you today and ask you some questions about your journey. So you with Untapped is the organization that you founded and which is the program that I'm a part of, which is how I met you. You founded Untapped to help ambitious professionals to connect to their purpose, unlock their potential, and impact the world. And one of the things that I noticed right from the beginning when I entered your world is that you say you work with evolutionary experts. So can you tell me a little bit more about where that niche came from and what that means to you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's so great to be here and excited to explore more. So for me personally, evolutionary experts, I think in the rise of, digital businesses and online businesses, in the information age, we've seen a huge transformation of really businesses being able to be created from people with niche expertise and skills. And this might be a health practitioner going online and giving their gifts and wisdom to everyone in the world. It might be a communication coach being able to grow their programs and train other people. And so really we've seen this massive rise of the information age and the digital world where you can suddenly share your expertise online. So when we talk about experts, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people from different niches, different industries, different fields, different backgrounds who are able to take that wisdom and really uniquely give it to the world. And the evolutionary element is really, for me, what's so important to all of it is that every single person who is one of those experts are doing that in order to evolve humanity, to expand our consciousness, to grow as a planet, as a species. Everything that we're doing is to contribute to the evolution. So the people we tend to work with, yes, it is about business, it is about leadership, it is about developing them, but at the core, it's because we all have the same mission, which is to evolve humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I would have never woken up and said, oh, today I'm going to evolve humanity, but I see through actually that phrasing, I see that now, oh yeah, we're all doing our little part in helping humanity evolve. So yeah, thanks for that. So I want to touch on your story a little bit because it's a fascinating story, and there's a big transformation that you went through. You started off as a corporate lawyer, and from listening to your podcast where you tell your story, one of the key moments there was, oh, I didn't really choose this. I didn't really choose being a lawyer. So this confronting moment that you had, can you speak a little bit more about that and what led to that and what came out of that? And because I imagine a lot of people find themselves in that place where they look around and one day they say, well, how did I get here? So I'd love to hear more about your particular journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I say I didn't choose that is because for me, that version of my life, and for me, it truly does feel like there was that life and that experience of myself when I was a lawyer living in that world, and then there's the life I live now. And they feel like two really different people. And whilst they're still me, it's a really a different version. I would say what I live now is more authentic. What I lived then was more conditioned and pre-programmed. And what I mean by that is, I grew up, my dad, my stepmom, they're lawyers, and I followed a very traditional path. I went to an all-girls boarding school, tick, 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 tick all the boxes. Because my programming was that in order to be successful, I had to do X, Y, and Z. And so I just followed that path. So the experience, when it wasn't, that I didn't choose it, it was simply that it was all pre-programmed into who I was and who I thought I had to be for the world and what was expected of me. But none of it at its core was authentic to me. But the truth was, at that point in my life, and even at that age, which, for me, I was about 23 when I really awoke to the fact that my life was built on other people's expectations. I didn't really know myself, actually, either. I didn't really know what I wanted. I wasn't that connected to who I was as a person and what my mission was. And so the journey was then getting connected to that before I could make any next move,
Right. Well, 23, I mean, I remember when I was 23, I wasn't connected to any of that either. I was exploring the world. I think at that point, I was still in college, actually. But yeah, I thought I wanted to be a fashion designer. I was studying fashion. And yeah, you talk about that you did a trip with your mom in Cambodia. How old were you when you did that trip?
Yeah, so that was when I was 15. And I'm really grateful. My mum's one of my greatest inspirations, my number one cheerleader all the time. So when I was 15 and I was at all-girls boarding school, my mum kind of said, you need to see more of the world, see more diversity, really see how other people live and experience that. And so at the time, that was semi-controversial also, based on the type of school I was at and my upbringing and all of those programs. And she was like, yeah, we're going to Cambodia and we're taking you out of school. And it wasn't so long, but it was a couple of months we were away. And that experience for me, truly, that was pivotal, because in that experience, I really awakened to the fact that my whole life is about impact and contribution. Like, I don't really care if, it's great if you make a lot of money and you have a lot of freedom and all of those things. But at the end of the day, when I'm gone, when it's my time to go, I want it to be that I actually made a difference in the world. And so that experience connected me to that part of me. And it really gave me that feeling of what is it like to use your skills. Not that I actually had that many valuable skills. By the time we got to the community, I remember trying to teach English, realizing that I had no idea. I may be able to speak English, but I can't teach English. So it became quite an awakening thing, being like, what can we contribute here? But of course, we can always contribute something. But that was really pivotal. And that led me to a series of, before I got into coaching and the personal growth world. Prior to that, I was doing a lot of fundraisers, and my friend and I would throw these amazing parties and raise heaps of funds for her community in Tanzania, ours in Cambodia. I started an initiative that, New Zealand local artists donated their art and designs to Christmas cards. And then I sold all those Christmas cards to corporates for their clients. And we raised money to go to the homeless shelter in Auckland. And that was like a social enterprise. So all of these initiatives all came from that experience, and were all prior to me deciding to do my own thing. So it was kind of a build up of micro experiments and of expressing that impact in the world as well.
Yeah. And what did you see in Cambodia that influenced you so much?
So yeah, there was a few interesting experiences. I think one that really, like, I remember when all the kids, they're technically what we would maybe consider orphans, but they don't necessarily create themselves that way. But that's they've come from different families, or they've lost their parents and ended up in this beautiful, beautiful place that's been created in the middle of, nowhere in Cambodia. But they would put themselves to bed, these little kids. And I had nieces and nephews at the time. I was quite a young auntie. So like, when I was an auntie by the time I was 14. And so I had nieces and nephews, and I knew, they were how old they were. And I remember one night everyone was going to bed. It was like our second night there, I think. And I remember just seeing all the kids put themselves to bed, and one by one, like these little 2-year-olds roll out their little mats, put down their little mosquito nets, and and it was really moving for me, I think, in that experience of just like humanity, like, wow. And obviously, when we experience moments like that, we get how freaking lucky we are and how much we have, and to be present with that. And that was huge. to really feel that humanity and feel that gratitude for the life that I had. Because I think once you experience that at your core, you realize you have so much to give and you have so much to celebrate, and you live in a really different way.
Right, right. And it's so much more about what can I get, but more about look at how much I have, and now how can I be of value and of service to other people? Yeah. Nice. And so you talked a little bit in the podcast when you were telling your story about your eating disorder that you had for a while, and how that coincided with when you were a lawyer, and can you talk more about that and how did that come about, and how did you overcome that? Because that's it seems like a really difficult challenge to meet.
Yeah, it was a long journey, that one, actually. And one of the ones that, when I always reflect on things I'm proud of in my life, it's one that I'm like, oh, that was the depth of my soul. That was really meeting like what I was made of, It was like, I've built a lot of things, I've broken a lot of things, but like that for me was something I'm truly so proud of, because there was many days that I thought I'm never, ever, ever going to be free from this. Like, this is my reality. So my eating disorder, and I think people use that language so vaguely and kind of throw it around. Like, I experienced anorexia, and then I had bulimia for a number of years, and they were both really different. They were both hugely impactful in my life, isolated me socially, created paranoia, let alone body dysmorphia and all the functionalities that go with it. But mine developed out of my parents divorced. I went to boarding school. I developed this hyper focus and discipline, and I became a rower, you could say elite, like training internationals and things. And I just got ridiculously focused on that goal. And a coach at the time said, Briony, you could go into your own single and row on your own, and you just need to be this weight to go in this category. And give me a goal, give me a thing. Given all my upbringing and all those perfectionism tendencies I was in, I just hyper focused. And in that experience, there's no one to blame, but simply that, you create those neural pathways, you create those habits. So that's when my anorexia began. And that really isolated me socially. The very last, I got dead last in the rowing race, like my last race I ever raced. I got totally last because I had, eaten away at all my muscle mass, and I wasn't meant to be that weight. I mean, I was the weight to row in the category, but I wasn't designed and built to be that. And I just rolled out of the boat.
What weight were you at that point?
I was like 59 kilos, which for me is like 15 kilos smaller than I am now. And I'm like, got a good frame. I'm like kind of more muscular shape. So I was really little for me, and it's super sad. Like, I see the photos from my school balls and things. I look like, got that Bratz doll look. And it's like, I had the hair on my arms and had developed all those really obvious symptoms. And it was such a journey because there's so many moments to it, but I got dead last. My dad picked me up out of the boat. It was like, that chapter of my life is over, that's rowing was complete. And that was my last kind of time that I raced. And then my journey to recovery began. And the truth is, especially if anyone is listening to this, there is always hope. And it took discipline, and it took consistency, and it took so much help, and it took failing every day. And it took about 10 years of discipline to really reprogram, and a lot of different types of modalities. I did hypnosis, I did different seminars, and every single time I tried something new, it would be like a little cog, it'd be like, oh, okay, that gave me some freedom. And really, really moving through it. But it was a really isolating time. And it took, a lot of focus to get to that place. And there was many days I was like, I'm never going to be beyond it. And the final point was I remember just standing in this in-person seminar, which is why I love in-person stuff so much. And I got that I was not my body. This whole thing came through I am bigger than my body, my soul, my spirit, my essence, who I be in the world. And it dissolved that kind of last piece of the identity attached to it. And it was freedom. It was a wild journey. And I think it's something that's not talked about enough. And it really does. I had a therapist at the time, or a clinical psychologist, who said, the statistics are, in reality, 90% of people never recover from this disorder.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's really high. It's the second. Eating disorders take more lives than depression and suicide, like the statistics.
Wow,
as a mental disorder, the statistics are absolutely shocking.
Wow.
And so I had all of that I had to kind of break and be like, well, I'm not a statistic. I'm me. I can be in the 10%, like it was a whole journey.
Yeah.
But
wow. Well, I was really surprised to hear that in the podcast story that I listened to. And I mean, knowing you now, you would never know. You would never know at all.
Yeah.
So congratulations for overcoming
Thank you.
that. Yeah. Really impressive. And so you were working as a corporate lawyer. You were trying to advance in your corporate law career, but you kept getting rejected. And one of the things you said in the story was, I had a limiting perception of what I could create with my life. And it sounds like it was really born from, you saw this path that other people in your family had taken, and you thought, okay, well, here's what's available to me. And then you started pursuing that. But then you kept getting essentially sidelined, like, no, this is not going to be your path. And then you found Landmark, right? And it started to, as you said, crack you open who you were at your core. You started to look at what you were hiding, what you were avoiding. And then once you notice what you're hiding and avoiding, of course, I feel like it's a contract that you have to take action on them, right?
Yeah.
Is what you were saying. So then you took to this coaching career in Auckland, I believe, right? At a cafe, you said?
Yeah.
So tell me about one of those first events, because obviously, how many years ago was that?
6, almost 7, probably realistically. Yeah, probably like 7 years ago.
Okay, so a whole lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Tell me about one of those events. Like, what were you like? How was that for you? Give us a snapshot.
Yeah. So it's so funny. The first one. So what occurred is I did some of these seminars. I traveled to America and Australia a lot. I got like so much wisdom. I'm from New Zealand, so it's a small place. No one was up to personal growth stuff at the time. That was like very weird. We have tall poppy syndrome, so you should not be seen to be, that's basically like you do not want to succeed and you do not want to perform and be seen to be trying to perform. You play it cool and pretend that, it just all happened naturally. And so experiencing that culturally, I was like, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to take this on head first, because this is, for a small country, this is tragic, and so I was like, right, I'm going to make it. I did a whole bunch of market research interviews, and people again reaffirm this, like, embarrassing, like, why would I want anyone to think I need a coach? Like, I don't have any problems. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to recreate some kind of new possibility around this, that it's cool, that it's fun, that it's the thing to do. And so I knew I couldn't just do one-off sessions and things. And I was doing one-to-one coaching with some people, but I wanted to share the wisdom of what I was learning and bring it to New Zealand. And I knew that it had to be done in a very specific way for it to resonate. So nothing too deep, just something accessible. So I started with what was called Why Wednesday, right? Like, find out your purpose, your why, what you're about. And I did it at these like really trendy, cool restaurants down in Britomart in Auckland. I love just thinking that they let me do that on reflection. But, they were nice. They were nice coffee. You got coffee as part of your ticket or whatever. And I just used a really cheap platform to set it all up, like an automated thing. And I would do these breakfasts. So I think they started about 7:30, maybe even 7:15. So early birds, prior to people going to work, all professionals. And we would come, I would share a little thing about why, purpose, how do we uncover, how do we know who we are, how do we get to that core. There would be a handout with some really terrible branding, which people kept pulling out of their handbags like years later. People would be like, I came to your breakfast session with this like horrible PDF. I was like, oh gosh. Yes. And it like had stars on it. It was like, Why Wednesday? Untapped didn't exist.
Also,
yeah. It was like, and my friends came initially. And I think with any of that stuff, that's kind of it, right? Like, where does that all begin? It's like people in your world. And so some of my friends came, and I'll never forget the first breakfasts where randoms came, like people I didn't know. And I was like, oh, how'd you hear about this? Anyway, 400 people went through that breakfast, and I was there every Wednesday, whether it was 2 people there or 25 people there, I was there. And so it built that trust and it built that consistency. And that's where my untapped audience or community began. So yeah, it was pretty funny on reflection, but it was also incredible, and it was unique, and no one was really doing it at the time, and it built community, and it was really fun. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds great. And so then Untapped was basically born from that. And why did you choose the name Untapped?
So I had all these horrible names, like such bad names. Like I had this list of like wing woman, she something, like all these like, just terrible. Yeah. And I remember I sent them to my friends who were like lawyers. They worked at the same office. I like sent a little email. I was like, what do you guys think? Like, and they were all like, I think we can do better. And I was like, okay, do better. All right. And then I went away, and that weekend I used to go on, when I was still working, I used to go in really early in the morning and also in the weekends or the evenings to do Untapped stuff. Untapped didn't exist yet, to do coaching stuff. And I went in, I remember it's like a Saturday morning, office was empty. I used the whiteboard and I just started like riffing on the whiteboard. I was like, okay, I've got to get to the core of what this is. And I was like, it's like potential. It's like uniqueness. It's like vastness. It's like people are so freaking infinite. They would not even know what was possible. It's like they're untapped. And then the word just like came through. And I was like, that's it. And it really is, in essence, all of it and all it stands for. It is like, we fundamentally do not know what we're capable of, and we still don't, even in science and all of it. And so it is that untapped potential, and it's that ability to access and understand that about yourself. And that, yeah, so that's where the name came from. And it was such a great moment. And I remember telling people like, that's it.
Thank God. I know naming is such a process, right? We both know that.
Well, you're amazing. Yeah, exactly. It's such a creative kind of unfolding,
Definitely. Yeah. That's great. And when you were saying that right now, and you said the word untapped, what came to mind to me, and I don't know where I read this, but it is how with professional sports, how every year we break these records, right? We're constantly breaking records. And you ask yourself, well, how is this possible? Like we're the same human beings. How is it possible that we can continue to, run a 4-minute mile or whatever it might be, whatever that record is, and keep going further? And I've always been fascinated by that, by the idea that when we see others moving beyond what we consider their full potential, then we also have permission to do the same. So yeah, I love that. And I've definitely experienced that in your program as well. Just feeling like, I can do so much more than what I'm doing now. So yeah. Well named. All right. So then Untapped was born, and here we are today. And there are some quotes that I want to read back to you, things that you've said that I want to ask you about. Amazing. So this is fun part of the interview, right? One of the things I read it was in the Forbes article that was written about you. It said, the paradox of success is that everything that made you successful today is what will hold you back in the future. So I'm curious what this means for you, and if you have some examples that you could share from your own life to help us understand better.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think success is a really interesting phenomenon, right? The first thing I think we all have to understand is like what success even means to each of us. And like we've talked about, that redefinition of who am I and what are my gifts and what does a successful life mean to me? There's all the traditional conditioning of success we see online or in the world, but you have to really know at your core what that means to you first. But this quote specifically, what I really love is that I've worked with a lot of high performers. That's really who I support. It's really kind of, people that just continue to press the boundaries of what's possible and show up and do the work. They've got those high performing tendencies. And I was always really inquiring and curious about what would get them stuck in their life. Like, why is it that the person who's in an executive leadership or in a, position then kind of just stays there? Why does the person who became, an entrepreneur and got their business to a certain level stay there? Why do they not keep pushing those boundaries? And the more looking into that, and the meaning of this quote is really that success, we start to rest on our laurels, right? Or we get to these certain points, and there's a lot around this. And so we get to these certain levels that we thought we were capable of, as we were talking about, and then we start to rest on our laurels. We start to think, okay, I've kind of already got there. And we get lazy and we stop doing all the things that made us successful, which is a really interesting phenomenon. And we also fear losing what we have. So, and that's really scary for a lot of people. And, people stay in relationships that they shouldn't be in because they think, well, this person's kind of good. They're quite good on paper, but they're not my person, but they're good. Or they stay in careers that are a good paycheck, but not really aligned and not true, or keep delivering programs or things in their business that don't feel true to them anymore, work with clients that aren't aligned because, well, it's good, but it's not great. And so human beings are naturally loss averse. We do not want to lose anything. We have a bias in our brain that's like, do not take stuff away. So instead of staying in that game and that creativity of what's possible and pushing boundaries, we hang on to what we have. And we keep thinking that's going to produce new results. And we forget that what made the results was pushing boundaries, letting go of things, being brave, going after the intuitive nudges that you get. And so in this quote, that's really what I see. It's when people have created a level of success in something and they're so afraid to let that go. But one of my favorite things to tell people and clients, like, for example, everyone thought when I left law that I was actually bonkers. Like, they were like, why would you do that? Like, you have worked so hard, you're at the top tier firm. Like, what? And one of the things I say when I work with high performers and things, like, if you created success in that area, you will create success in the other area. Like, it's inevitable, right? Because it's who you are. So I think this is really about being willing to let go of what's good, to go after what's great, and be brave enough to do that, because everything that got you to that certain level, you can't keep spinning that pattern and habit. It won't create the breakthrough. You have to be willing to let something go, give something up, or, transform yourself into a new identity. And that's what's going to elevate you into those new levels.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the hero's journey, right? Like, we're constantly on this hero's journey, and there's a problem, and we have to solve the problem, and then we solve it, and then we learn a lesson, and then what happens is we start over again. And if we don't allow ourselves to see that next problem and strive to solve that next problem, then we can't evolve. We're kind of stuck, and stuckness is not it's not the frequency of humanity, right? Like, humanity constantly needs to be changing. And so yeah, that makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I know it's personally true for me too. I've had a lot of success, and I get to a place and I get my gin and tonic and I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm doing great here. And then the next day I see the new problem. And thankfully I am a pretty active person, and I'm willful, and I'm like, okay, let's solve this problem. Let's do it. But yeah, stuckness is definitely it. It happens to all of us, right? It's not that some people don't get stuck and others do. It's just taking action on the stuckness is what makes the difference. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
nice. Another thing you said is your level of consciousness should move up from willful, in other words, making sales and getting stuff done, to intellectual, which means thinking strategically, and then to intuitive, resting and pondering. So being in one of your programs, I know I hear you and Delaney talk about this all the time. And I would love for you to unpack this a little bit more and talk about how this has shown up in your own journey as well.
Yeah, this is a great distinction. So this distinction primarily comes from a guy who, there's levels of consciousness. David R. Hawkins mapped out these kind of energy fields we have at each level. Frederick Dodson adapted it more into the willful, intellectual, intuitive, and then Delaney and I kind of took it into our life and business and looked. It's everywhere, and so this is really thinking about it's not that one is better than the other. And I think that's so important when it comes to this conversation of consciousness, because everyone wants to be enlightened and be the most conscious. That's not what this distinction is rooted in. It's that all of these levels are important. You need them all. In fact, you need to be integrated in them all to live a full life and have that success and create that impact. So the willful is really that operating system that is all about action, productivity, doing more. It's that real get shit done energy. It's really about action and moving forwards. And it's fundamentally important for us in our day-to-day life. Even as teachers or trainers, you have to turn whatever you're teaching into something actionable. Like that's really important for humanity to be able to grasp onto something. Mm-hmm. And what you tend to see when people live and operate, and when I did live and operate fully in that space, like only in the willful, we hit burnout and just overworking mode. And I've totally been there in my own journey as an entrepreneur. I just didn't rest enough. I was just always on, always there. And so the risk you have is burning out, basically, because your body needs the rest, the rejuvenation. Your brain needs that space to access creativity. Mm-hmm. So that's where a lot of people, I think, spend most of their time. And unfortunately, social media and things put us back into an even lower consciousness, which is reactive, which is not even moving forwards, progressing, taking action, but actually just reacting to the stimuli in our world. Mm-hmm. And that's that really dysregulated space. So if you want to elevate, when we want to elevate out of our willful, that's about starting to get intellectual. For me, my two places I primarily hang out are the willful and the intuitive, which I'll speak to soon. So intellectual was kind of like clunky and boring for me, actually. Like it was like, there's got to be a clear strategy and all these financials and systems and things. Now, this has been an area I've had such a transformation with, and like really started to fall in love with the intellectual element. But this is the planning. This is the strategy. This is the systems. This is the process, creating order within the chaos of what you're doing, and having a clear strategy and a kind of clear process to what you're doing, whether that's in business, like having a clear offer, values, offers, proper financials documented, or, in your life, maybe it's even thinking more intellectually, like when Dee and I think about our personal growth, like we have a plan for that. We go to a couple of seminars a year, we read certain books at certain times, then we debrief. We take what we learn and turn it into like intellectual property. Like we have a process to how we learn, and that helps us intellectualize it and take it to a new cognitive level, right? So that willful is really that action-orientated muscular kind of memory. Intellectual is bringing that brain online and more strategic. And then your intuitive operating system is all feelings, vibes, right? And I love this space too. And this is where you transcend the doing and you transcend the kind of thinking. And this is equally as important for entrepreneurs and everyone in our day-to-day life, because this is about tapping into something a little bit further afield than you, right? Is literally where you're getting into that conversation of frequencies. So just examples, you walk into an interview and they say all the right things, and they offer you the job and the plan looks good and the offer package looks good, but something just feels weird and off. And that's that intuitive consciousness. It's like it's picking up on the energetics. And then you get these communications to your intuition, right? Which is that this isn't the right fit. Very difficult to explain, the intuitive. And that's what I think. I think it's like 3% of the world actually live there all the time. Not interested in deadlines, difficult to put words to because it's more of a frequency. It has to be felt and experienced. And I've personally found this a lot in a huge amount of the in-person seminars and maybe more personal transformation work that we would do with our students. It's difficult to put words to. There is processes and systems behind it, but it's a felt experience. And once you feel it, you never forget it. And so that's living more from that intuitive place. You can use a lot of guided visualizations and things for to access this type of energy, but it's also really, really important to bring that online as well. I think particularly in entrepreneurship, or your day-to-day life, there's a huge place for it as well. And it's forgotten often because it doesn't look as productive.
Oh God, I know. And I'm so guilty of that. I actually have a friend who's also an entrepreneur, and we were having a drink one day and he told me something like, yeah, Rebecca, I maybe spend 2 hours a day working. And he's like, the rest of the time I'm just staring into space, thinking about stuff. And I was kind of like, at first I judged him and I was like, well, you need to be productive and get things done, but he's way more productive than I am. So I just didn't understand. And then it started to occur to me that he's relying on his intuition to guide him. And then that guidance informs the strategy, which also takes place in the thinking space. And then there is the, creating the action for his team to do. Yes. And once I had that conversation with him, I started to look at my own process and I was like, wow, I spend a lot of time hustling every day and I'm not being super mindful of how I'm spending my time. I definitely don't spend a lot of time looking out the window and imagining what could be or vibing on what I'm doing. And yeah, it's been a real hard transformation for me that I'm still going through. I still have to allow myself to, like yesterday I was in Vienna and I had probably an hour for free. And I thought, well, okay, what am I going to do? I could go here, could do that. And I'm looking on my phone and I was like, just go sit down and have a coffee and stare into space. And it was so lovely, but it's not often the place that I go to. I have to force myself to do that, even though I understand the value of it.
Yeah. And it is, it's the practice, right? And similar for me, I think, and it's just getting that the world is set up the other way. Like most of the world is to tell you to be productive and use more minutes. And so you're up against a fair bit of conditioning as well. And so being gracious with yourself and even as you said, like, it's not always about the thing, but it's even the awareness, like for you sharing that, it's like the awareness that you're resistant to it. For me, meditation, oh my gosh, it's like my life's greatest work. I'm like, one day I'm going to be excited to meditate for, and I'm starting to like access that in a new way now, but that's been like literally 12 years of trying to apply this practice. So yeah, it's not easy. And it's more awareness, and some seasons or days or weeks are going to require a different level of consciousness. So something, I think there's a helpful tip to put this into practice because it's an intellectual concept, right? But something we do, like something I'll do is I'll look at my day and I'll go, okay, this bit, like for me today, this morning, a lot of willful, like I got up, I did some doc reviews with students, I did some stuff for clients, there was a lot of willful energy, and that used a fair bit of my tank actually. So then I had a break and recharged, had some water, had a coffee, like just let myself recharge. And then I had calls, interestingly, when I go onto calls or even this conversation, for example, that willful blah, 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 energy is not actually that helpful on calls, right? Especially, with clients, or it's because sometimes you need to be a bit more, okay, like still need to turn it into action, but just present with what they're saying. Let's say more intuitive. And so I almost map out my day, and we have these, Dee and I have these transitions where when we transition from task to task, it's like turning that part of us on. It's like, okay, if you're going to go to a call in 5 minutes and you've been in this hustle, willful energy, don't rock into that meeting with that. Take 3 minutes to meditate, to get yourself back into the intuitive, and then go. So we have these cues to help us transition tasks, which has been really helpful. Yeah.
That's nice. And do you map out, are you able to map out your day to have certain activities at certain times? Like, for example, are you more willful in the morning versus the afternoon? Yeah,
correct. So I do a lot of like interviews and calls, team calls and stuff all in the afternoon. My willful energy and my focus energy comes on early morning. So like, I try not to take too many calls like early morning. I'll do, I've divided it a little bit differently now. I have themed days. So Tuesdays and Thursdays are my call days. So I just get to drop in, be present, have all my liquids. I got my water, my alkalinity drinks, my coffees, and I just get to be there all day. There's nothing too much required. I don't check emails on those days. I don't try and push, and then Wednesdays, Mondays, that's like those are my get shit done days, like clear the emails, write copy, whatever it is. So that I've done themed days, and that's been a game changer as well. And for sure, yeah, you could cut up your day and try, because I think as human beings, like when you're transitioning so much between those different things, you can hear when we're talking, there's such different frequencies. Like that's where people get overwhelmed. So if you can kind of be like, my mornings are my willfuls, and then I do all my calls from 12 o'clock. I took a while to develop this discipline. Dee was really disciplined. My partner Delaney was super disciplined about when he did his calls and stuff. I would kind of just like let them slide in until I realized the impact of it. It was like, okay. Yeah.
It's super important to be able to organize your time in a way that works for you. I mean, I remember the day that I decided, okay, I'm not taking clients on Fridays or Mondays. That's it. And it's super helpful, because that way, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I am on Zoom, I'm present, and it's a very different energy than, like you said, checking emails or doing stuff behind the scenes for the business. So yeah, nice. Okay, I want to ask you some questions about your speaking. So you're an international speaker amongst many other things, and I saw that you just spoke in Finland. You did a talk called "How to Build a Team of Players" for an organization called Smart Mentoring. And I'm so curious, because actually the first time I noticed you, the first time that you came into my world, was at the Female Founders, the She Sapiens event here in Lisbon. It was their anniversary party, and I remember I walked in late and you were just finishing up and you were holding the mic in front of the room, and I didn't really hear what you said because I was late, and I think you were kind of finishing up. Maybe you were answering questions or something like that. But I remember thinking to myself, like, who is this woman? I need to know her. And I just got a great feeling from you. And often, I mean, it makes it's not a surprise at all that when I listen to people talk, I'm either drawn to them or I'm repelled by them, because for me, communication is an expression of personality and vibes and all those things. And so when I heard you talk, I was like, oh, I really like the way she's talking. She's very clear. She is very engaging, very relatable and personable and positive, and all these things that really resonate for me. And also, I love your humor. I lived in Australia for a couple of years, and I have a lot of friends from New Zealand, and I love that style of humor. It doesn't take itself too seriously. From Texas, we're the same. So really, I appreciate that. But I remember seeing you and hearing you and thinking, like, this woman has something to say. Like, this is a woman I want to pay attention to. And then I got onto one of your workshops and then signed up for your program. But I'm curious, because you are a great speaker. And for me, I'm interested in a lot of things about your style of speaking. So for example, when you're asked to speak in front of a group, or maybe do a presentation like this one you did in Finland, how do you prepare for that? Like, what is your process?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for all those compliments. So yeah, an event like that. So my main thing is I reverse engineer, and anything in my life like that, I would do that. So when someone leaves this room, or after they've experienced this talk, this event, this experience, what do I want them to know, believe, and feel? Like, I'll start with that. As soon as they leave, what do I want them to know? That's the intellectual. So there's things I need to teach them. Believe, that's that fundamental, right? To make the most transformation, many people have to transform their beliefs. So what do I want them to believe? How do I want to transform, have them experience something new in my presence and what I'm sharing? And feel, which is empowered, inspired, creative, whatever it is that the message of that talk. So I start with that, and then reverse engineering, I'll look at what would go into the talk to experience that. So, okay, these 4 distinctions. So this one in Finland, it was like, right, it was about building, everyone wants A players, but A players don't want to work for B leaders. Like, you have to be an A leader. That was the keynote. So how do I help them be an A leader? And reverse engineering the distinctions that go into that talk. Distinctions being living from radical responsibility, leading from, empowered consciousness, some fundamentals of actually running your team, and then the beliefs work. And when I think about beliefs work and transforming someone's belief in a talk or an event, it's a lot of storytelling, right? Because, you need to believe, obviously, what you're sharing, but for someone to have the same epiphany or transformation that you had, often the best way to do it is through a story. So got the distinctions, what are the key stories around this content that's going to help them transform their beliefs? The example in the keynote, most people think that teams are really hard and you can't trust team and no one will do it like me and everyone's useless. Like, that's what a lot of people think when they go to hire. And I knew for that keynote, I was like, they need to believe that this is going to be amazing, that this is going to help them grow their business, that you can trust people, you can let go. So in order to help them transform that belief, I had to do a lot of stories around my journey with that, right? Like learning to trust people, how our business boomed when we had a team, like really adding to that. And then, of course, one thing I used to skip over a lot, and I'm still probably a little bit guilty of it, but is like, I would just get on stage and just start, like, let's just get into it, distinctions, come on, who doesn't want to learn? And after, people would ask me so much more, like, but who are you? Why are you talking about this? How did you end up here? And so then so then whenever I do my planning, I'm like, and what's my story? Like, why am I here? Who am I for these people? Why have I been invited onto this stage, right? Like, to really create context for them. So that's kind of how I would reverse engineer the planning and preparation. I'll practice it a few times. I'll be honest, I'm not an overly engineered. You probably can see that from my style. Like, once the frameworks are in, I do flow a little bit, meaning I don't sit at home and rehearse it nonstop. That said, when I was little, I did do speech and drama. So I do have a tendency to be able to remember things, recall pretty fast. We did a lot of like poems and prose and stuff when I was little. So my recall, like, once I have the framework there, the recall's pretty quick. And then a few days before the event, I'll visualize it the way that I want to experience it. So I'll use timeline therapy. I'm timeline master practitioner. I'll float 15 minutes over the event. Like, in my timeline, imagine 15 minutes of the event is complete. What was the experience? How did it feel? What are people saying? How do I feel? And I'll mentally rehearse that and put that in my body, so that instead of focusing on me floundering or saying something funny or weird or falling on stage, I'm focusing on what I've mentally rehearsed. And then my last piece, I just surrender and see whatever's going to come up. I'm like, let's go. Let's see what's in the room. Yeah.
Well, a couple of things you said really resonate with me. One of the things that people come to me preparing for presentations, and almost 99, 100% of the time, they forget to connect with the audience first. And they forget to tell their story or who they are, or have some piece of something that connects them on a deeper level. And they just go, like you said, straight to the agenda. What are we going to do? And it's a shame, because that connection is the first thing that you need to do in order for your message to even be transmitted. So I'm always coaching people to share more. And the common pushback I get is like, oh, well, no one wants to hear about me. It's like, well, actually, no, they do want to hear about you. So I'm glad to see that. That's natural.
And I find that now when you're listening, if someone doesn't create themselves or their story or the context of it's actually really hard to listen to them, because your brain, it's like an open tab. I'm like, who is this person?
Because what I found is that you can't like geolocate them in your mind. Who is this person? How, like, what is the relationship? How can I relate to them? And if you don't have any information, then you can't relate. And then, it's just like a waterfall, and you can't put the water in anything. Exactly. And I love what you said also about mentally rehearsing instead of overly preparing. I generally I'll rehearse the first 5 minutes because I know that that's when you've got the most adrenaline and maybe your heart rate's higher and you're nervous because people are looking at you. But then after that, generally, I have some bullet points memorized that I know I need to hit. And then the way I get to them is a much more flowy, authentic style. And that's really a fun piece because that's when you can play off of the audience and you can be more creative in the way you're sharing.
Yeah. I think it's a really good tip, like the first 5 minutes, because you're right. That's when, you're a little bit maybe fumbly and I always speak too fast at that point. And I think that's a great piece of advice. Just do that piece, because if you master that, you'll naturally then flow into the room. Yeah, That's awesome.
Totally. Yeah. And how do you know that you're ready? Like before you got on that plane to Finland, how did you know, like, I'm ready to do this?
Oh, good question. In terms of preparation or like speaking at all? Do you mean like preparation for that specific one?
Speaking at all, like for me, I know when I'm ready because it's a feeling that I have. I get excited versus anxious.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, for me, it's like there is a message. So there is a clear message, and it is a feeling as well, probably more in my gut. It's like a knowing and a communication. It's like, it's time to share this now. And there's a lot of things I wouldn't speak on, or wouldn't feel ready to speak on, or even just feel congruent is a word that comes through when we're talking about this. Like congruency for me feels like, that's integrated. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've learned a lot of things. I can share a message here. That's like, it's like a full body yes, and it just feels congruent. Feels like I can transmute something really powerful here. Not in every area, but in this area for sure. And I knew that even the one in Finland, like with team, it's a huge journey. I made so many mistakes. I wasted a lot of money. I cried in my car so many times thinking I wasn't equipped or cut out to lead people. Like the integration and the wisdom I felt like I had to share was just so clear. So for me, it is that like full congruency here. Like there's nothing questionable about what I'm going to share. It's like, this is going to help.
Yeah. It almost sounds like you're saying there's a confidence in your ability to share the experience that you've had. Like no matter what comes up from the audience, no matter what questions that come up around this topic area, you have the confidence to know that you can handle it.
Yeah, it's so funny you just say that. You just picked that piece up, because I spoke at another event maybe like a month ago around wealth energetics, around this distinction of the expansion of our body and nervous system to create more wealth and abundance. And the one piece of feedback that the person running that event gave me was exactly what she just said. She said, I just felt like no matter what the audience threw at you, you were ready to roll, you could hold it. So it's you picked that up beautifully. That is what it feels like. Yeah. And I think, and it helps me facilitate that way, because I'm less about the keynote and the presentation, and I'm more ready to be with the people in the room and maybe what will arise.
Exactly. Yeah. It's really, that's something that occurs for me too, is that when I feel ready, it's not even about the content anymore. Like the content is a nice to have, but it's that feeling of wanting to connect with the people in the room. And, Gandhi has he said a beautiful thing. Let me see if I can pull it up from memory. He said, you find yourself when you lose yourself in the service of others.
Yes.
That's it. I know for me, when I'm speaking, definitely live, but online as well, is that when I lose myself in this, oh my God, how can I help these people? And what do I need to communicate? How do I need to communicate so that they get it? Then that's when things become electric, and it becomes super fun for me too.
Yeah, amazing. I love that quote. Yeah, that's it. So beautiful.
Well, Briony, thank you so much for your time. This has been a super interesting conversation. I really appreciate you and all that you're doing with Untapped and in the world. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for the really insightful, powerful questions. It was insightful for myself answering some of those.
Oh, amazing. Great. All right. Well, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your week and your day. And I'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Okay.